All right, do I need to hit anything here or am I all set?
You're good.
Okay,
Well, you might need to.
there we go. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Lake County Audubon. I've watched from afar the amazing programs, offerings, field trips, people that you've mentored and got connected to nature. So, thank you very much for all that you do in the community here. It's funny what tenure kind of does for you. You're just present, so you kind of know these things. The projects that I've worked on at Lake County Forest Preserve have been varied, have been amazing. Thanks to all the constituents, the taxpayers that support the work. Lake County Forest Preserve is among one of the best in the Chicago region. And I think a lot of people recognize that. And I'm so grateful because of the opportunities that we all get to do to restore habitats and protect the birds and make the habitats better. One of the controversies of late, it seems like now, is the effort to remove buckthorn. It's been going on for 30 years, but the scale now is ramping up because we're recognizing that unless we intervene, unless we take charge, our systems are going to collapse. So I thought my title was clever here. Birds of a feather should not flock to buckthorn. And I strongly believe that. I've been a birder longer than I've been an ecologist and a botanist. So I have that same passion. Bo, where's Bo? I think I kind of know birds, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm with you on all of that. But I think with my work experience and my vocation, I want to present not a different viewpoint, but just provide more information so you understand what's going on with our restoration projects. So here's the cheat sheet that explains everything that's bad about buckthorn. I don't have much good to say about it. And I think many of you agree with these qualities or these traits. It's invasive. It's very prolific. It moves around really fast. We've all crashed through buckthorn thickets and know how dense they can be, so much so that the sun can't reach the ground. Because it's a non-native species, that plant came over 400 years ago to North America, but all the insects and pests that feed on it didn't come along with it. So like many introduced species, plants, that's why they grow grapefruit removed from the place that they originated from. There isn't insects. There are no insects that feed on that. Buckthorn does change the soil chemistry, and that has to do with a very nitrogen-rich leaf matter. And nitrogen in our natural areas is a bad thing. It may be good in corn and beans or your garden for tomatoes, but native plants generally don't do well with that. And of course, it changes the habitat structure of everything. Oak woodlands, prairies, wetlands. Once these non-native shrubs invade, it just drastically, in the span of 30 years, changes everything. It's a total loss of that plant and animal community, the native ones. You still, but it's a very simplified system. And in nature, anytime that you have a simple system, it's vulnerable to anything. Climate change, a storm, a drought, flood, maybe an outbreak of some pest. So it's a bad thing when that all happens at once. So I think most of us are familiar with the two kinds of buckthorn. In Lake County, there are 5 different kinds, and 2 of them are native. The 2 native ones, which are barely knee tall, went extinct, unfortunately, 100 years ago. They're wetland plants. There's a few left along the Fox River, but we have the common buckthorn, which represents 99% of the buckthorn that you see when you drive down roadways. It's an upland species. The glossy buckthorn on the right tends to be a wetland species. Now, what is it? About 25 years ago, you could still buy both of these at Home Depot and Menards. It took Illinois a long time to classify them as noxious weeds. Eventually it happened. But I can visit any Burger King almost in the Midwest and find glossy buckthorn in the drive-up window parkway. So they're still out there. All of these are still out there and spreading fast. On the on your left is the distribution of the common buckthorn, the one that's 99% here in Lake County. The fuchsia colored, Minnesota and Iowa, and it looks like Vermont and maybe Connecticut, they consider it noxious weeds. So that's why that's a different color. But the blue shows that northern latitude distribution of the plant. Basically, that's the same climate as Europe, where in northern Asia, where the buckthorn came. On the right side is the glossy buckthorn. It's interesting how it misses the Great Plains there. There's very few locations for that in North Dakota, South Dakota, and even parts of Montana. It tends to be a wetland species, so that's probably why it skipped there. Now, this map is 45 years old. I'm sure there's buckthorn across the entire continent because it's growing in ditches now along Interstate 80 or something like that. So it's still moving around. Buckthorn was first introduced to North America probably by accident. It was part of the ballast in the early European colonists. And then as people moved westward, they just brought the animals, the feed, the manure, the tree balls, the soil. So it moved quite quickly. There is a reputed medicinal value to that. So maybe that was also the reason why things were moved westward as well. But of course, once it's established, I think all of us recognize that birds eat buckthorn berries, mice eat buckthorn berries, squirrels do as well, even fish do. So it's that seed gets around. So once it's established somewhere, it's loose and it's going to keep on moving and start establishing new populations. So how common is buckthorn? Well, in the year 2022, I believe, the Morton Arboretum did a survey of all the trees in the Chicago region. Guess which one was number one? Buckthorn, common buckthorn. It represented 36% of all the trees that were counted in these random plots throughout the entire 22 county area. If you look at the area, it was 10%. So looking down from space, 10%.
Used to be 40%.
Were buckthorn. Somebody be muted.
36.
So the other thing, locally in Lake County, 50% of every woody stem out there, if you count all the box elders, all the oaks, all the hickories, 50% of all those stems are buckthorn stems. So it's a super abundant plant. And I feel old now, but I remember as a kid interested in this, there was no buckthorn around. It's really in the last 30, 40 years that it has arrived. And now look how about a show of hands? Do you remember those times when buckthorn wasn't, wasn't that long ago?
Didn't exist.
Yeah, I sometimes think that some of the big name architects, landscape architects along the North Shore with the large estates, people emulated the European landscapes with broad lawns and fence rows and hedgerows. And as much as I admire Jens Jensen and Olmsted and some of those, I think they perhaps introduced some of them. And in fact, to this day, some of the biggest buckthorn trees you find are in Highland Park, Lake Forest, not to point fingers, but it got started somewhere. So what this omnipresent buckthorn has done is something, there's a little image on top that, well, at the very top, under that toolbar there, it says green blindness. We drive through or along St. Mary's, along the tri-state, and we see green stuff. And a lot of people don't recognize that that's buckthorn. So we're just kind of blinded by the omnipresence. This photograph should not have anything green in it. Everything that's green here is basically non-native, and the vast majority is buckthorn. This is a November oak woodland scene. So this is what people now recognize as normal, but 40 years ago, it would not have that same appearance. And buckthorn right now occupies 20% of all the ground cover in our forest preserves. And without control efforts, it's going to keep on going and going. So I want to talk about some of the, the control efforts that we're implementing. But, why is it dangerous? Because there's a vicious cycle. Once buckthorn gets established, it perpetuates itself. It kills basically everything else. Only seedlings can survive under that dense shade. And it keeps on cycling. The picture on the right shows some oak trees that are overtopping the buckthorn. Well, those oak trees, when they die of old age, won't reproduce because there's so much shade on the forest floor that there will be no generation. So the other kind of doom and gloom is we perhaps, unless we intervene, will be the last ones to see this oak savanna, oak woodland generation, unless we plant plants. And it's really the buckthorn's fault that's preventing that, or our fault for not implementing the right management. Oak woodlands have been around for about 5,000 years, and probably in the last 200, they're in serious decline. So I mentioned on the right, the dense understory or the dense shade that buckthorn creates. Very little grows underneath it. It's great for woodcock. It's great for, a sparrow that's kind of scratching the soil there. But you can see there's very little ground flora underneath it. They're going to stop, they're going to look, you might find them, but there isn't enough food there to sustain them or support them. So it kind of is a sink where they're not getting a lot of energy out of that. And it leads, because of this, to low plant and animal diversity in these buckthorn thickets. And the soil erosion is quite bad too. So here's a topic that I'm curious about, and I think we've heard it a lot, the asynchrony, where insects and the timing of migration may not be perfectly matched or even ideally matched. That green fuzz at the bottom of the forest floor there is buckthorn. And you can see how, and we all know how early it greens up. And, birds, they've evolved to say, oh, green foliage, there must be bugs there. Well, buckthorn is a relatively pest-free plant, so they're going to fly to it. They're going to forage, but they're also being lured perhaps to migrate earlier because of this early flush of buckthorn and honeysuckles. I think many of us know as well that grow or that leaf out earlier as well. So this is a big issue with all sorts of things, the mismatch of food sources and the timing of bird migrations as well. Changes in the soil chemistry. Buckthorn leaves are very rich in nitrogen. So when they decompose very quickly with the aid of non-native earthworms, it just fertilizes the soil. So, and fertile soils are good for weeds. They're not good for the native asters, the native woodland plants, or even the prairie plants. Some of our most difficult prairie restorations are in recently abandoned ag fields. We need that nitrogen and ammonium nitrates to leach out. So native plants have not evolved with that rich nitrogen level. Garlic mustard loves it. So once there's enough sunlight under some of that, or once we clear the buckthorn, some of these invaders, the other non-native species move in very quickly. And deer are a conveyor of garlic mustard seeds. So with the high numbers of deer in many of our preserves, and certainly throughout Lake County, the deer are moving around garlic mustard seeds all over. And the salamander there is because when buckthorn decomposes, it releases a chemical that is toxic to amphibians. So if you have vernal pools in these buckthorn thickets, you often have mutated salamanders and frogs, or they just don't develop. And there's published studies about all this. This isn't brand new information. We're just trying to catch up to the 40 years of buckthorn invasion out there. But birds love buckthorn berries, or do they love it? I'm curious, you find them there. You can always find a yellow rumped on buckthorn berries in February. Well, what else is there out to eat? There isn't a whole lot, and they're probably sticking around only because of those berries, cedar, waxwing, starlings, cardinals, robins, bluebirds. I'm curious if maybe afterwards, if you've seen other birds eat buckthorn berries, I'd like to know. I read recently that they're not really good foods for them either. They're rich in carbohydrates and not protein. So it's kind of like sugar snacks. They'll eat it, they'll stick around. I don't mean to anthropomorphize birds, but oh, look at that bush, it's full of food. Well, how many of them die in the wintertime in February, March, trying to sustain themselves on the buckthorn berries? I don't know. But I want to step back 300 years ago. There were lots of shrubs in our native ecosystems. Shrubs that mimic or buckthorn that mimics the native shrublands were very abundant. Some of the early descriptions of areas around here describe miles and miles of thickets of hazelnut, wild plum, sumacs. It was a community that moved around. It all depended on where the fire was and how frequent the fire burnt. The picture in the lower right is oak woodland that had a very hot fire burn through it. And all of those oaks and hickories became shrubs. And that would happen again 5 years later. Another shrub thicket forms, but these were dynamic communities that were all dependent on where the Native Americans started fire. And a lot of these shrubland birds have the ability to move around. I don't know how, I don't know why they do that, but of all the birds, they certainly have to be more dependent on flying over landscapes and saying, here's where I'm going to live this year. Because these communities are not stable. They moved over time, over the centuries. But look at the density of the shrubs. You see oak trees and there's sumacs underneath them on that left-hand side. Very dynamic community. And there's a long list of native shrubs. Now, these are the shrubs that used to grow everywhere along in the prairies and the wetlands. But once the prairies were plowed, they disappeared. Once the fire was stopped, they disappeared. Because a lot of shrubs, for those that know about rejuvenating your shrubbery, your hedgerow, you just cut it off and it comes back again. And that's what fire was important. It provided that mechanism there. But all of these are the native shrubs. The photograph shows gray dogwood, one of my favorite plants because it allows other plants to grow with it. Think of buckthorn, it just towers over things and shades everything out. In this photograph, there's a few buckthorn pictures. In 10 years, it would all be buckthorn and this community would disappear. So instead of 150 plants, you have 3 or 4. And again, the lack of diversity also means lack of food or low amount of food, and also means low visitation by everything else, animals, birds included. Native shrubs provide an amazing resource for food. All of the passerines, the vast majority of them in August, September, are stopping in these shrub thickets of native shrubs and eating dogwood berries and viburnum berries, cherries. Instead of eating insects like they did from April to July and August, they switch instantly to these protein-rich berries. Buckthorns aren't ripe at that point. It's almost like they need that winter freeze to even make them edible. I don't see birds eating buckthorns or the berries in July, August, September. It's not until they freeze. So that's an important source, and we've lost this community type. It's really no longer exists along old county roads wherever they exist anymore. We've managed our landscape, with herbicides and mowing and things like that, that we've lost this component. This sounds pretty depressing, huh? But we can do something about it. And here's a few pictures of birds that are typical of woodlands that rely on a shrub component. Now, buckthorn has been that shrub component, and that's not self-sustaining because that in end is going to become so abundant that there won't be any room for these birds, and the oak trees will eventually die. But in healthy woodlands, you find these species of birds. The red-eyed vireo there next to the grosbeak and between the cardinal and the grosbeak, that's generally a treetop bird. That's where you see it, but it nests down low in the shrubs. All the others, wood thrush and towhee, hooded warbler, they're down low, but you find them in oak woodlands. These are the losers. When buckthorn and just an example of the losers. And losers, I mean, you're going to find all of these in these buckthorn thickets, but there's no long-term population sustainability of these things. A flicker, for instance, they feed on the ground. Well, we've all tried to crash through buckthorn thickets. Well, this bird can't reach the ground either. Redhead woodpeckers eat acorns. Well, without the ability to fly down to the ground, hawks and owls, they're patrolling through the treetops and reaching the ground. Dense buckthorn prevent that. Now, there might be habitat nearby, so you're still going to see a great horned owl or long-eared owl roost in the buckthorn, but it's not a good habitat for them. I can't remember if that's the least flycatcher or a peewee, probably a peewee. No, that's the least flycatcher, so they're down low. The shrubland birds, these are the exciting ones, and these are some of the rarest birds in our region, and also some of the most imperiled ones. That photograph in the background is Greenbelt Forest Preserve, where we've done some management. We cleared the buckthorn. All of that was solid buckthorn, but there were a few hawthorns and dogwoods and sumacs in there. But it took 10, 15 years to reach this kind of picture here. But a solid buckthorn thicket does not provide habitat for catbirds, for brown thrashers, for golden winged warblers. The shrikes don't like solid thickets of buckthorn. White-eyed vireos, a lot of southern birds are shrub thicket birds, and they're moving northward with time because of climate change. It needs these open patches that have prairie, shrubland of various densities as well. Good old common yellowthroat and blue-winged warbler. Blue-winged warbler may be the one that can tolerate the densest buckthorn thickets. Bo, would you agree with that? Or any other birders?
You usually find them in open field areas.
Yeah, okay.
Like Lions Woods out in the open field.
Yeah. So in young successional fields where the shrubs are small, the dogwoods, sumacs, hazelnuts, willows, you get all these birds. Without management, the buckthorn's going to come in. There's something called seed rain. That's what buckthorn does. It rains seed all over. And without removal, without controlled burning, it will, in a matter of 15 years, eliminate this habitat. So what do you do? How do you control it? And I know you recognize all of this and know this, but volunteer efforts are the best for controlling buckthorn. It's a scale that's small, but we all make a difference. But more importantly, it's a connection. It's the people's connection to the land that tell forest preserve politicians, hey, this is important to us. We need to get involved. And they also say, hey, we're not doing enough. How come you're not removing more buckthorn? And I think all of us recognize how important that connection is to a piece of land, so you can own it, take care of it, and be responsible for it. So love the volunteer effort. I know you guys have been working at Old School and probably many other preserves, lake forests, open lands have Audubon groups working there too. So very valuable. But the Forest Preserve is also being more aggressive about it and going out with contractual help, where on an average, we're clearing about between 300 and 500 acres of buckthorn per winter. We use skid steers and big equipment. That's the stuff that alarms people, including myself. It's drastic, but so is the state of the land before we cleared it, solid buckthorn. So I like to think of this as like a person's health. We can let the buckthorn live. It looks green, kind of survives, but it's not a healthy situation. And eventually it's going to die. So it's time to operate, or it's time to apply some medicine here. And this is often the look that you see. You know, we used a tree mower here. Basically, it's a giant mower that spits out buckthorn. There's some collateral damage. You can't maneuver this thing exactly. So an occasional elm or ash or dogwood gets mowed. But this is a look, and it looks terrible. But it's part of this process. You know, we think, how long does it take to make a prairie? Well, for a lot of people, in 3 years, the grass is this tall and you see compass plant and prairie dock and you think you're done. And in a sense you are, but the shrubland community takes even longer because you're waiting for dogwoods and hazelnuts and sumacs to grow. So the time scale is quite different. It's nice when you have this existing tree and shrub component to it, but in many places, buckthorn invaded old pastures or old ag fields. So it's solid buckthorn with nothing growing underneath it. So you're starting from scratch, basically. There's also equipment that grabs the shear cutting. It's basically a shear that cuts the tree, lifts it and piles it up on a brush pile, or a feller buncher, which is also used in logging industries where this articulating arm just grabs it and cuts it and piles it up. So, you know, big scale, covers a lot of ground, cost efficient, and works quite well. And one thing that's very critical after any kind of clearing project is herbicide application. Buckthorn, like any other tree or shrub, is going to keep on resprouting. The roots are alive. So it's important to kill those things with very careful application of herbicides so we can break this cycle. And the other thing you don't see are the gazillion seedlings that, you know, all these berries now with the sunlight are waiting to germinate now too. So important management effort. But here's some of the, I don't want to say dirty secrets, but the secrets that I want to share with you, because these are some of the most critical steps in maintaining a shrubland component for our birds. And again, it's almost rarer than prairies and things like that. But we all know that buckthorn is serving a purpose. It's a shrub component for a lot of these rare birds. Well, what's the alternative? Well, there really isn't one unless we plant it. We all plant wild butterfly gardens and prairies and things like that. We have to get serious about planting shrubs back into these environments. And, you know, you can grab a handful of hazelnuts and throw them out in the field, and you might be lucky if one grows. It's a whole different ballgame. It's not like a bag of milkweed seeds and you get great germination. So this is the difficult part of this whole process. You can buy things at Possibility Place, for instance, but those are $25 a pop. And, you know, shrublands contain hundreds, if not thousands of these things. So there's a cost issue going on. So one of the things that I think is important is that we start collecting plum seeds and hazelnut seeds and sumac seeds and dogwood seeds and just throw them like we're seeding anything else there. So this was an effort at Greenbelt where we planted 300 hazelnuts and sumacs, and I'm sad to say that these plants, shrubs that we planted, are still in the same pot or the hole that we dug for them. They're not moving. Again, the time scale is different. You know, we have to measure this kind of restoration in decades or even longer lifetime. But if we don't do anything, we know the results there. And controlled burning. You know, the Native Americans recognize that fire is the deciding factor about where trees will grow, where shrubs will grow. And we're learning we have the ability to control fire more precisely. You burn on days when it's not real windy or dry. So you protect some of the smaller trees or the bushes and things like that. So any kind of clearing has to follow up with fire. Any kind of clearing has to follow up with planting trees and shrubs to replace the buckthorn. These are some of the things that I want you to ask the forest preserves, you know, like, what are you doing? So I have a checklist of things. Oh, here it is now here. So the top part says something like, critical questions to ask when you hear about a buckthorn clearing project. And some of these are hard to answer, but they're the critical questions that need answers. What is the restoration goal and the timeline of a project? You know, if it's to protect rare shrubland birds, what's going to be done to replace the buckthorn that served as a shrub for those birds? You know, how many hazelnuts are going to be planted? How many elms or hickories or oaks are going to be planted? And one of the critical things is knowing what those priority species are, you know, because every animal, every plant has different needs. So asking those questions, what's significant about that restoration? What are you going to do for those things? That's important. Know how much money is allocated for that restoration. You can't do a project and say, we're done and walk away. We all know that, but you know, on average, it's about a $5,000 price tag per acre to manage these areas. So across the forest reserve, when you count seed, trees and shrubs, controlled burning. So when you think of the tens of thousands of acres that we've managed so far, you need an endowment to keep these things going. Without it, we're going to go back to buckthorn. How many trees and shrubs will remain after buckthorn clearing? You know, there's a lot of weedy things that we call weedy, box elder, cottonwoods, elms, but those are important habitat focus for those birds. So, you know, think of northern oriole in an elm tree. You know, it's weedy, it's going to die in 30 years, but it's critical for that blue grosbeak. You know, on and on and on. How many native shrubs? And then that one image, I'm going to backtrack real fast. Oh, it's too far. This is a critical thing that I want to make sure you hear and ask the ecologists when they start new projects. This was all buckthorn. They spared the young cherries and hawthorns there. A lot of times the buckthorn chips are so thick that it takes years for that to decompose. And until it decomposes, you're never going to get seed to germinate in wood chips, nor are you going to get what survived in the soil to grow through it. So, you know, an alternative process would be, instead of chipping it, cut it with a shear and burn it in brush piles. But this stage here may affect how quickly the shrubland bird component can return. Reduce the amount of chips, which is good, but then you might get a flush of teasel and, you know, buckthorn. You know, it's kind of like mulching your garden bed or something like that. There's good and there's bad, how much, but it's important that the project manager has an idea how thick. Our specifications for contracts say no deeper than 2 inches. That's a good depth, because it takes about 1.5 years or so for that to decompose. Meanwhile, you're spraying the resprouts there and not getting collateral damage with the good things that are popping up through those chips. Wow, that's it in a nutshell. Here's that picture of Greenbelt Forest Preserve, which still has yellow-breasted chats and blue-winged warblers, and maybe one of these years the chats will nest, but because Greenbelt is just a 1/2 mile from Lake Michigan, you know, everything stops in there, and it's just a matter of time. We're now clearing an additional 100 acres this past winter. So all total, there's going to be 500 acres of kind of some of the best shrubland bird habitat in the region, because it's over a large area and there's various degrees of shrub densities, things like that as well. So thank you. Are there any questions or? I mean, yes.
Could you tell us in general for the forest preserves, how much money they are spending on planting the shrubs? Because I think everyone in this room understands that buckthorn's a problem.
Yeah.
It's just that you're making us really depressed that it's going to take decades, that we will not see shrubs. And then
Yeah.
definitely I've never seen one regenerate in my yard. So,
Mhm.
and I've cleared it. So
Yeah.
I think you've got to be planting lots of shrubs.
You do, yeah, and
So-
that's why I identified this question, because no one really in the entire Chicago region is going in that direction. We're doing token plantings.
That's what it feels like. So
And
we
yeah.
wanna, that's kind of what I wanna understand
Yeah.
is how much is the Forest Preserve right now budgeting towards that initiative versus just clearing.
Well, and it
I
depends,
understand
yeah,
I understand the clearing.
it
need, but-
depends on the community type. You know, there's a lot of oak woodlands, oak savannas where shrubbery has always been low in abundance or coverage. So those communities don't take as much. It's primarily the the woodland birds that benefit from the understory clearing. And without that, we don't have oak generation. So it's not so critical. The fields, the prairies, for instance, Greenbelt, I don't know how many tens of thousands of dollars are being spent, but it's a big chunk of change. There's a lot of money, and it's just beginning now. And that's why I threw out, we need to start thinking about collecting hazelnut seeds. We're gonna have to make this cheaper and in a higher quantity to make it work. And, if only 1% of them germinate and grow in 10 years, then it may be a success. That's the big dilemma and the big challenge.
Do you have any idea how much the Forest Preserve is spending on clearing versus how much they're spending on planting shrubs?
I can get you that information.
Okay, because I think that,
Yeah.
I think that is one of the
Mhm.
Yeah.
concerns
Yeah.
about the balance there, because it feels.
Yeah,
I just all the bare space and.
I see it too, but we are removing buckthorn. So, and if we don't remove buckthorn, what do we get in the end too? So, there's this learning curve that we're going through. The entire science of restoration is going through that. This is brand new stuff. How long did it take us to figure out how to restore prairies? Gee, we're still not there, and that's been going on for 75 years. So it will take more money. It will take more concerted effort to say, all right, what's our management goal? If it's for a blue-winged warbler, then we're going to have to plant something. And those are the questions I want you to ask the ecologists. Now, if it's just to see a Blackburnian warbler that happened to be passing through that landed on a shrub, and as cruel as it sounds, it's neat for a checklist, but it doesn't really do the bird any good. And, we're looking at the long-term picture here. And a bird will land anywhere, and if we happen to be there, we'll see it. But it doesn't mean it's the best habitat for that as well.
But
Well, you can follow up and then we'll go to the next.
no, we do need to support, this is a very important migratory.
Yeah.
Passage, and so we do need to, those birds cannot survive the 50 years if they don't have good
Right.
places to actually, land and
Yeah.
eat insects and stuff, and so I don't want them to
Yeah. And
migrate. We need to support them as well.
right,
so.
and we have to remember too that Forest Preserve represents about 10% of Lake County too. So there's a whole lot of other pictures, and
It's all private land.
yeah, it's private land. You don't have access.
Most of it's buildings.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot
it's-
of industrial and.
Yeah, but
Doesn't
You-
Lake County Forest Preserve have an incentive program for people in their own private property to get rid of the buckthorn?
they do. There's some financial, some of the municipalities are doing it, so it's catching on. But the key.
We have some hope somewhere. This is like, I just want to slip my wrist.
Yeah, oh gosh, I didn't want to do that. But I wanted to be real to the situation here too. Yeah, Bo?
So, there's no doubt that Buckthorn is awful stuff, but what makes me sad and all the rest of us is that, when you take out and clear cut all the understory in every forest preserve and don't restore any of it,
Mhm.
then you have nothing. And so not only that, but 90% of research that I looked up online said that it's 90% effective in removing buckthorn if you plant natives after removing the buckthorn. So I'm thinking, why don't we clear out an area replant the natives in that area and then move to a new area and then clear that area and replant
Well,
the natives
and
there.
every,
Instead of wiping out all the understory in every forest preserve.
every clearing project does have that follow-up seeding. It takes three,
Yeah, but
four,
that's what I'm saying, though. It should be done immediately.
well, we can't.
Why not?
One,
Why do-
because of the thatch and because of the huge amounts of resprout control that's necessary. So if we're gonna apply herbicide carefully, you know, we're investing a lot of money to get the good seed and get the good shrubs. And, you know, old school, and I do want to say, we plant tens of thousands of shrubs. But as we say, they take a long time to grow. And
They're-
also,
They're there, though, and then a lot of other places where it's been clear cut, there's this buckthorn regrowing again.
yeah, it's a vicious cycle. And
So, I mean, if you replant the natives there, that's gonna reduce how much buckthorn grows back.
every project has,
And, yeah, I'm thinking this is more of a waste of money than it is utilizing the money efficiently. Because you're gonna have to go back and then clear the buckthorn again.
well, that's where fire comes into play. One match can control that quite well.
We're gonna burn up a lot of other stuff besides buckthorn too.
We will, and you know, these are native things that have been accustomed to fire for thousands and thousands of years. So it's the time scale that's kind of hurting all of us. We want rapid change. We want an ag field turned into a prairie.
Well, it's the scale. It's too large. It should be done at a smaller scale at a time. Because then you're ruining the habitat. There's so many birds that don't breed here anymore that used to be here.
I go upland sandpipers. I can.
No, I
make-
mean, from the forest
I can
preserves,
make,
buckthorn removal.
well, you know,
No wood
it's,
thrushes, no oven birds, no veeries,
well,
no
go-
chats.
So before buckthorn, where were they breeding? What were they breeding?
We had wood thrushes breeding at Daniel White. That was cleared all
yeah,
out.
oh,
No, I said,
there's,
what were they breeding and what plants?
Oh, in the
The
understory. I don't know.
buckthorn.
They were in the understory. I don't know what plants they were in.
yeah,
Right.
those shrub, you know, McCarty, you know, look at
There's
some
some
of.
at half day. There's not.
Look at some of our older restoration projects. MacArthur is an example, parts of Daniel Wright. That shrub component has come back and we control the buckthorn. You know, we now have Canada warblers, Kentucky warblers, hooded warblers. Yeah.
Well,
things-
those have only shown up at Ryerson, which has very little removal of stuff.
Well, there's other preserves too. So it's just,
They don't eat the birds.
wood thrushes are there and we all know bird populations do this too. It's just one of those things that, you know, I understand the scale and that is a discussion in our office here. But the alternative is just this vicious cycle and it's going to get worse and worse and it's going to infect more areas. So that's why the homeowners outreach. We can't just look at our little preserves. We have to look beyond the property lines as well. And, you know, Greenbelt is a great example of 15 years of management. We lost 90% of the buckthorn and those birds are still there because we planted, because those small trees grew up and became larger, the native ones that we're desiring. They never had a chance with buckthorn there. And buckthorn would be a two species kind of thing. Starlings in wintertime and buckthorn during the summertime.
I got a question,
Yeah.
and I don't know if I can even make the comparison about Dutch elm disease. Is there an organism that we could put into that buckthorn and?
Yeah, I've wondered about that. You know, we've all been looking at buckthorn for 50 years and I've never seen a pest of it.
We could develop something if we put our minds to it.
Danger. Warning.
Yeah, you know, I gotta think, and I don't know, that someone must have gone to Europe and Asia to see what's eating that thing. That's a biocontrol is the,
Asian carp.
yeah, the best. You know, it's 50 years ago, there was no buckthorn. We're whittling it away slowly but surely. You know, the same is true about garlic mustard. I'm sure Don can remember and others. It covered hundreds and hundreds of acres because of efforts like controlled burning, hand pulling, and competition. It's now turning the tide. Purple loosestrife. You remember purple loosestrife and what it looked like?
We got the beetle.
Yeah, the beetle helped. And so this isn't a quick fix. I think I'm first a birder, then a land manager. There are hundreds of thousands of acres of buckthorn Are they within 10 miles of your house? Maybe not, because we cleared them out at some place, but looking at big population trends, without a doubt, you look at Medewan, some of the, and Orland Grassland, some of those big sites where they've done that, those things are working there. It's just the scale that we have to.
Is it still a problem that people have these on their personal residences? Is there escape from those into the wild places?
For Buckthorn, sure, the bird is the vector,
Okay.
and it could eat a seed in southern Illinois and fly northward, so that's.
Have you observed an effective conversation with homeowner? I see plenty of homes with Buckthorn in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Have you observed effective conversational techniques?
Well, I'm not directly connected to it, but yeah, our public outreach have amazing programs with cost sharing, with looking beyond the forest preserve boundaries. I brought some printed literature that says, cut your buckthorn, here's what you can plant instead. And, we all know Buckthorn provides this wonderful screen of privacy. A lot of people love that. It's a hard sell, but all right, buy nannyberry, buy 9-bark, and wait 10 years. Well, I don't want to wait 10 years. I have it there now. So that's our, but it's changing. It's one neighbor at a time, one preserve at a time. Those pictures of post clearing are ugly. Visit in 3 years, visit in 10 years, visit in 15 years. And the preserves aren't just for us, they're for the big picture, long-term kind of thing too.
So with the buckthorn removal, I mean, like we've all agreed, it's terrible. But when they're doing the project, are the contractors also advised that it's, I don't want to say okay, but that the collateral damage of elms and sumac and ash and cherry and black walnut and some sugar maple. And I know cottonwood seems to all be taken down, even though I know there's one native species, but there seems to be a lot that's removed that is not just buckthorn. And that's what concerns me, that we're doing kind of a holy grail for, and I love my redheadeds, for certain species.
Sure.
We're trying to bring them back, but then, there's a lot of other species that we're not managing for.
Right.
And I understand your questions and I really like that. I don't know who I'm supposed to be asking that of.
Well, the ecologist, Patty Vitt, to throw a name out, the director of the natural resource program. There's only 3 of us, myself, Dan Sondash, Matt Olson, Nick Huber. We're writing the contracts, and these are the critical questions to ask. And we're also considering, well, are the oaks reproducing under the elms and ash and cottonwoods? That's the long-term community goal. Those oak species maintain the greatest biodiversity than anything. Now you need a cottonwood for the warbling vireo or for the oriole, things like that. So that's the nuance, that it depends on the site. I know there's a lot of issues at Wright Woods when big swaths of cottonwoods, and we took some heat from that. So I'm glad. It's important to have this dialogue, and you birders and ecologists and naturalists are the ones to say, to question those kinds of things. So bring it on.
Could you talk about Wright Woods? Because there's a lot of, not just the cottonwoods that were cut down, but there's an awful lot of dead trees. And what is happening there? Is that some oak disease?
Oh, no.
That is spread across the
No,
the
that's
region?
flooding. That killed all those trees. What, 5 years ago, 6 years ago? That was the flooding when Milwaukee and Kenosha County got a big flood, when Wadsworth Prairie in July was flooded for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
That flood came downstream, and it took those swamp white oaks and bur oaks and white oaks and sugar maples 5 years to die. So that's bad stormwater management upstream. That's farm drain tiles and, you know, sewers that are stormwater. So that's tragic what happened there. And,
Because it's really.
Yeah.
Dramatic.
yeah,
It's-
what's tragic is, you know, that for 300 years, that never happened. And it happened twice in 10 years, I think. Is Patty? Yeah,
Yeah, 2017 was
Yeah.
an unusual event.
yeah.
But you're correct, that it was an event that was made significantly larger by the amount of runoff that
Yeah.
was generated from it.
And what's happening now is, well, fortunately in the Des Plaines River, we have that emerald necklace of preserves. So new plants are going to move in, new animals are moving back and forth. But again, these are measured in decades, centuries of time. We're augmenting things. We're putting rare plants that were drowned out. Bishop's cap, if you know Bishop's cap, beautiful thing. Red-headed woodpeckers love it. You know, it's, you know, just think 10 years ago how rare red-headed woodpeckers were. So it's, again, it's that whole cycle of things. Yeah, Glenn.
Yeah, no, I just say, you know, over the years of being a steward, I have actually, my own personal thing is noticed. A lot of the birds do not eat as much buckthorn berries as before.
Okay.
And I think it's based on just seeing how many berries I still see late in the spring. That were from the winter, and it's almost like the birds are knowing that they're gonna get diarrhea and maybe die. And they've done some little transformations here, but I do see a lot, and I think that most people know it's only on the female tree.
All right.
Probably it's not on the male, so.
Yeah, well, buckthorn is dioecious, so there's a male tree and a female tree. So if we can only figure out which ones are female, cut those. That's another.
My other comment was, I noticed that a while ago, it's been a number of years when we were all talking about removing buckthorn, because I had shrubs in my yard when I moved in, didn't even know they were buckthorn. Because that was so common to use that, you just trim them down and they grew up. But they were still selling them off of 83 on the way to Long Grove at that place. And you can still probably buy teasel.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's a decorative item, which is so invasive, you know, it just.
Mhm. You know, just to be totally upfront, the scale is being discussed. What do we do about it? You know, it's a system that's collapsing, and we can just say, let's not even start, let's just, or we could slowly do things and learn from those things without learning this process. We're recognizing that buying shrubs in the pot may not be cost effective. We don't have enough money. The tax support isn't there. So can we grow these trees by throwing seed like we throw sunflower seeds on the ground?
What's wrong with bare root plants? I did my whole garden bare. root
That's a
plants.
good suggestion. Yeah, you know, you have a lot of mortality if we,
Village place, and they were fantastic.
yeah, that's, you know, but that's it. And we used
What
to do that.
Stop chopping stuff down and replant stuff with bare root plants. That's
Yeah.
what we should do. I'll be out there tomorrow doing it.
Good for you.
Yeah, we did that at Cuba Marsh where we did some buckthorn and we planted those shrubs among dogwoods. So when the fire burned the prairie nearby, it would keep those hazelnuts and sumacs going. So that's what used to happen for centuries. You know, that was the ebb and flow of things.
So I'm hearing that you've stepped up efforts, the Forest Preserve has stepped up efforts, obviously, to clear buckthorn.
Yeah.
Acres and acres and acres of it.
Well,
And according
400
to-
acres. Yeah.
The questions that you've asked us to ask, is there enough resources to keep those cleared acres from returning to buckthorn?
Mhm. Right now we're not ahead of ourselves. You know, fire is the most cost-effective way of controlling buckthorn once you remove the big things. We burnt 5,000 acres this year. It's the highest we've ever been able to do. During the COVID years and before that, the weather just didn't cooperate. So, you know, we're relying on controlled burning. So hopefully we have those continue.
This is state give you any support? I mean,
No.
does U of I have a system they're trying to implement that would help with Buckthorn and such?
You know, it's education. I think it's awareness. It's like saying this isn't right, this isn't healthy. And, you know, there's a referendum coming up. I know I want to, you know, we need money to manage these places.
Oak disease. I mean, the Forest Preserve is very focused on
Mhm.
this oak savanna concept, which is wonderful, but the chestnut trees all died, the elm trees have all died, and to rely on one species, family, seems somewhat dangerous that,
Well-
we could get oak disease. I'm threatened every
Yeah.
day. I feel like it's.
All of our, you know, with our clearing projects, with our canopy gap creations, you know, we are leaving lots of basswood, lots of elms, lots of hickories. So we're not eliminating any one species. We're just trying to create gaps so those seedlings of all those trees have a chance to create the new generation. So it's happening out there. And again, you know, how long does it take to grow a tree this big? That's our issue.
Again, so, yeah, I've been involved in a lot of the volunteer restoration efforts over the years, and I'm curious, is there an acceptable level of like a thicket under this oak, canopy of a native species that can replace it, or do you just want it to be so spaced out under these oaks, so it's like a savanna? Because, when we take out some of these buckthorn in that like 10 to 20 foot range, you do find birds nests in there, and maybe these are more adaptable birds.
Mhm.
But sometimes we'll see like some of the more native, whether it's like, I don't know, all the willows are, or sugar maples or something, and it's like, oh, here's a big cluster of them, and then let's take those out because they're gonna be a nuisance if they're all together.
Yeah.
So is there like an acceptable thicket level of like a native you can put in at least to get some of these birds? That you can, once you take the buckthorn out, or is it just gonna be open space under these big trees?
You know, we don't know the density. It varied, and that's kind of the beast. Like there were pockets of dense dogwood and hazelnut thickets, and then scattered here and there. When you're dealing with like Prairie Wolf Slough, that's such a small area. Who knows? It's probably not. You can get a breeding pair of something. One breeding pair, but we're trying to look at the entire Chicago River corridor where we're talking thousands of acres. So I guess to answer your question is, we got to do something, plant something, and if it's suitable habitat, it's going to spread over our lifetime, and we're going to allow fire to control that. And if we feel like hazelnuts are getting too thick, then we burn on a hotter day, or we take a brush cutter and thin it out a bit. We have to learn as we do this as well. And we observe too, and we have data points that track all of these things. So we have permanent monitoring points for all the breeding birds, all the vegetation, now amphibians, insects. So we're going to get a trend. We're going to find out. And if we need to tweak things, if we need to plant more shrubs or create more canopy gaps, we're going to do that based on the data that we learn and read, interpret 50 years later, unfortunately. Yeah.
Ken, you're managing more than just birds. I mean, this isn't a lot about me. I understand that. But
Yeah.
You're managing for the Blandings turtle, and I'm sure you're doing frogs and the eastern western prairie orchid and that. So I mean, a lot of this plays in taking all this out and opening up these areas encourages those other plants to come in. I mean, if you go out to Pine Woods and look what they've done there, those were ag fields, of course. But to just see all the stuff that's coming up because it's clear.
Yeah.
There's some positive benefits. I understand it does hurt the birds, but it also helps other animals and plants.
The more diverse the community is, the more complex it is, the more resilient it is, the more species that visit that place. It may not be our favorite bird. Henslow sparrow is an example. We had lots of Henslow sparrows early on in our restoration effort. Rollins was packed with them. Oh, gee, the prairie's growing taller and becoming more robust. We're losing the Henslow sparrows and the bobolinks and even the meadowlarks. So it's this is what happens. We can't. It's not a static environment, and there will be change. Now at Dutch Gap and Prairie Stream, we're going to start new restorations, and a new suite of birds are going to utilize that. So all of these populations have just moved around, and when we have our little 1,000-acre preserve, it's, we can't manage for everything. We're trying to maximize the greatest biodiversity and what most critically needs that support. So we'll micromanage in some places for certain rare elements.
Okay, Ken?
I don't want to depress people. This is like, oh my goodness, look at that picture. That's, yeah.
Just some comments and questions from the chat. So to counterbalance that, Janice All says your presentation gives us hope. We've been planting native trees and shrubs and are seeing a huge difference. We're seeing birds that we've never seen before. So that's one comment. But she's also asking, and it was another similar related question, what's the best practice for treating buckthorn seedlings? The massive amounts that appear after you've cut a lot of buckthorn and all those little resprouts.
Yeah.
So if you
Well, little seedlings can be taken care of, even 3-year-old plants with a controlled burn. Get fire in there, you'll wipe out millions and millions of them with a fire that just passes over them. If they're bigger than your fingernail, you're going to need to cut them or carefully apply herbicide to the leaves or that cut stump or stem. So it's tedious, and competition. Plant other things that will displace those buckthorn.
In Lake County, there's a burn ordinance now. You can't burn except from October 1st to March 31st. You can't burn any other time of year as a homeowner. So that sort of inhibits getting rid of the seedlings that show up in June.
Well,
What kind of bird are you talking about?
talk to your elected officials, I guess, for starts.
You cannot burn leaves, garbage, sticks, except for in a fire pit in your backyard.
Get a fire.
fire.
So may I ask, what percentage of the forest reserves is undergoing this really intensive removal and replacement?
3%. Yeah, it's a very small percentage that, each year it's 300 to 500 acres, I said. And it's of various levels of effort or thinning too. So it's a small percentage that happens each year. We have 31,000 acres. We manage for wildlife, birds, plants, about 5,000 acres. The rest is just kind of, we don't have enough resources to manage that. So there's plenty of buckthorn. Think of Lakewood. There's thousands of acres of buckthorn at Lakewood. I can, getting mad now. There's so much. I wish I had a map of all the areas that, the oaks are not regenerating, the hazelnuts, the dogwoods, the sumacs, all those shrubs that we need for these birds are starving because there's not enough sunlight. And we're missing the boat if we want to rekindle those things.
We really the only reason we have to stop is before he passes out.
No.
It's because we only have 15 minutes to be